is a weakness inside you that no one else can see. Not your friends, not your enemies, not even the people who know you best. It lives quietly, in the space between who you are and who you pretend to be. The samurai called this the shadow blade, the weapon you carry that cuts only inward, and the most dangerous thing about it, you've learned to mistake it for strength. A master once stood before his student in the early morning, when the mist still clung to the ground like ghosts reluctant to leave. The student had trained for years. His strikes were precise, his discipline was admired, but the master saw something the student could not, a trembling in his stillness, a hesitation buried so deep it had become invisible. The master said nothing at first. He simply placed a single stone in the student's hand and told him to hold it until he understood its weight. Hours passed. The student's arm burned. His grip weakened. And when the stone finally fell, the master asked, "What dropped? The stone or the illusion that you were strong enough to never let it fall?" This is where the breaking begins. Not in the failure itself, but in the moment you stop lying about why it happened. The samurai did not fear weakness. They feared the man who refused to name it. Because a warrior who cannot see his own frailty will never know when the blade is already inside him. They understood that strength without self-awareness is just violence waiting to collapse. And so they built their entire philosophy on a single truth. You cannot defeat what you will not face. In the ancient dojos, there was no praise for perfection. There was only the quiet acknowledgement of what was real. A young swordsman could execute 1,000 flawless strikes, but if he avoided the one movement that exposed his fear, the master would see it immediately. The flaw wasn't in the technique, it was in the evasion. The samurai knew that the body tells the truth, the mind refuses to speak. A shifted stance, a breath held too long. The way the eyes look away from the opponent's center. These were not mistakes of skill, they were confessions of the soul. The dojo floor creaks beneath deliberate steps. Silence hangs heavy, broken only by the sound of breath becoming rhythm. In this space, there are no distractions, no music, no mirrors, just you and the truth of your movement. And in that truth, every weakness becomes visible, not as something to be ashamed of, but as something that must be acknowledged before it can be transformed. There's a story told in the old texts about a samurai who could not win against a particular opponent. No matter how many times they fought, he lost. His technique was flawless, his strategy was sound, but something inside him always faltered at the critical moment. His teacher watched him fail again and again, never intervening, never offering advice. Until one day, after another defeat, the samurai threw down his sword in frustration and confessed, "I am afraid. I have always been afraid. And I thought if I trained hard enough, the fear would disappear." The teacher picked up the sword and handed it back to him. "Fear does not disappear," he said. "It only becomes honest or dishonest. You have been fighting your opponent with dishonest fear, the kind that hides, that pretends it doesn't exist. Now, fight him with honest fear. Let it stand beside you like a second blade. Do not pretend you are not afraid. Be afraid and strike anyway." The next time they fought, the samurai lost again. But something had changed. He had stopped fighting two opponents at once. He had stopped battling the version of himself that was supposed to be fearless. And in the months that followed, his strikes became sharper, not because his fear vanished, but because he stopped wasting energy pretending it wasn't there. This is the first fracture in the armor of inner weakness, the moment you stop defending the lie. Weakness is not what you think it is. It's not laziness. It's not lack of motivation. It's not even fear itself. Weakness is the story you tell to avoid the truth. It's the elaborate architecture you've built to explain why you are the way you are, why you stop where you stop, why you turn back when the path gets difficult. And the samurai understood that this story, no matter how convincing, is a prison. Because as long as you believe your own excuses, you will never be free to change. In modern life, we've become experts at constructing these stories. We call them reasons. We dress them up in logic. We surround ourselves with people who validate them. I'm not good with discipline because of my childhood. I can't commit because I've been hurt before. I procrastinate because I'm a perfectionist. These statements might contain fragments of truth, but they function as walls. They are not explanations. They are negotiations with reality, attempts to make peace with staying exactly where you are. A distant wind passes through the trees outside the dojo, carrying with it the scent of cedar and rain. The samurai recognized this negotiation for what it was, the mind's attempt to avoid discomfort, but they also knew something most people never learn, that discomfort is not the enemy. Avoidance is. Because every time you negotiate with your weakness, you make it stronger. Every time you tell yourself a story about why you can't, you carve that limitation deeper into your identity. The lie becomes you. And then one day you wake up and realize you've spent years defending a version of yourself that was never real to begin with. Breaking this pattern requires something most people are unwilling to do. It requires you to stand still in the presence of your own truth. Not to judge it, not to fix it immediately, just to see it, to let it exist without the narrative you've wrapped around it. The samurai practiced this through zazen, seated meditation that stripped away everything except what was real. No distractions, no comfort, just the raw experience of being. And in that space, the stories began to crumble. Because stories need movement to survive. They need you to keep running, keep explaining, keep defending. But when you sit still, when you stop feeding the narrative, something else emerges, the truth beneath the story, the weakness beneath the excuse. And for the first time, you see it clearly. This is not a comfortable moment. The samurai texts describe it as standing in fire. Everything in you wants to move, to escape, to return to the familiar pain of your old patterns. But if you stay, if you let the fire burn away what is false, something shifts. The weakness doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it changes. You stop seeing it as a permanent condition and start seeing it as a habit. A choice you've been making unconsciously for so long that it feels like fate. The master walks slowly around the student, observing. The student's sword is lowered, his breathing uneven. He has just attempted a strike he has failed 100 times before. The master stops, considers, then speaks. Why do you apologize with your body before you even begin? Your shoulders drop, your stance widens. You prepare for failure before the blade moves. This is not weakness, this is loyalty to weakness. You have practiced failure so thoroughly that your body performs it without thought. Now you must practice truth with the same devotion. This is the breaking point. The moment when you realize that your weakness is not a lack of strength. It's a skill you've perfected. You are not weak because you can't. You are weak because you have become extraordinary at being weak. You have rehearsed it, refined it, built your entire life around protecting it. And now, the only way forward is to become equally devoted to something else. The samurai called this Shugyo, austere training that breaks old patterns through repetition of new ones. But this was not mindless repetition. It was intentional dissolution. Every movement was an erasure of what came before. Every strike was a statement. I am not who I was yesterday, and the key to Shugyo was this. It required you to fail publicly, repeatedly, without excuse. Because as long as you could hide your failures, you could maintain the story. But when every weakness was exposed in the dojo, when every mistake was witnessed by your brothers in training, there was nowhere to hide. The story collapsed, and in its place, something real could finally grow. In your life, this might mean something different. It might mean showing someone the draft you're afraid isn't good enough. It might mean admitting to a friend that you've been lying about how well you're doing. It might mean attempting the thing you've convinced yourself you're not ready for. Not because you'll succeed, but because trying will destroy the illusion that not being ready is what's actually stopping you. The samurai knew that the only way to break loyalty to weakness was to betray it, to act in opposition to it so consistently that it could no longer define you. The rain begins outside, soft at first, then steady. It drums against the roof of the dojo in rhythm, a natural metronome. But here is what most people miss. Breaking your inner weakness is not about becoming stronger. It's about becoming honest. Because strength without honesty is just another mask, another story, another way to avoid the truth. The samurai who broke his weakness was not the one who conquered his fear or eliminated his doubt. He was the one who stopped pretending they weren't there. He was the one who fought with his fear visible, his doubt acknowledged, his limitations accepted. And in that acceptance, he found freedom, because he was no longer expending energy maintaining an illusion. All of his power could finally be directed at what was real. This is the paradox. The moment you stop trying to be invincible, you become unbreakable. Not because you have no weaknesses, but because your weaknesses no longer control you. They are there. You see them, you know them by name, but they are not you. They are simply part of the landscape you move through, and movement, forward movement, honest movement, becomes possible again. The student returns to the same strike. His shoulders do not drop this time. His stance remains solid. He breathes once, deeply, and lets the breath carry the truth. I have failed at this before. I might fail again. But I am here. The blade moves. It is not perfect, but it is honest. And in that honesty, there is a precision that technique alone could never produce. The master nods, says nothing, and walks away. There is nothing more to teach. The student has learned what can only be learned by breaking. So what does this mean for you? It means you already know what your weakness is. You've always known. It's the thing you avoid thinking about, the conversation you won't have, the project you won't start, the truth you won't speak, the relationship you won't leave, or the commitment you won't make. It's the place where your stories are thickest, where your excuses are most elaborate, where your patterns are most entrenched. And it's not going to break because you read something or felt inspired for an afternoon. It's going to break when you decide to stop negotiating with it. Begin here. Stop explaining yourself, not to others, to yourself. Notice how often you justify your choices, your behaviors, your patterns. Notice how much energy you spend making your weakness make sense. And then, just for one day, stop. Don't replace the story with a better story. Don't try to fix anything. Just observe what happens when you withdraw your energy from the narrative. Who are you without the explanation? What remains when the story falls away? The samurai would sit with this question for hours, days, years. They understood that transformation doesn't happen in a moment of revelation. It happens in the accumulation of honest moments. Each one a small betrayal of the old self. Each one a quiet rebellion against the familiar. And over time, those moments become a new way of being. Not because you defeated your weakness, but because you stopped feeding it. You stopped giving it the one thing it needs to survive, your belief that it defines you. The rain continues, softer now, as if the world itself is settling into a quieter truth. You will fail at this, many times. You will return to your old stories. You will find yourself defending, explaining, negotiating. The path of the samurai was never about perfection. It was about return. About noticing when you've drifted and choosing to come back. The dojo was not a place where warriors became flawless. It was a place where they became familiar with their flaws, so familiar that the flaws lost their power. Because how can you fear what you know completely? How can you be controlled by what you've already named? Your inner weakness breaks the moment you stop treating it like a secret. The moment you let it exist in the light, without shame, without excuse, without story. It breaks when you say, "This is where I am. This is what I've been avoiding. This is the lie I've been telling." And then without fanfare, without drama, you take one step in a different direction, not because you're strong enough, not because you're ready, but because the alternative, staying loyal to the lie, has finally become more painful than the truth. The master stands alone now in the empty dojo, his own practice just beginning. The same movements he has performed for 40 years, the same acknowledgement of weakness, of age, of limitation, the same refusal to look away. He strikes, and the blade cuts through air that offers no resistance. But he is not cutting air. He is cutting the lie he might tell himself tomorrow, that he is past his prime, that his best is behind him, that there is nothing left to learn. The blade moves. The lie falls away, and he is free again for another day to be exactly what he is, not invincible, just honest, and in that honesty, unbreakable. This is the way, not a destination, not an achievement, a way of moving through the world where your weakness walks beside you like an old companion, acknowledged but no longer in command. Where every day is another opportunity to betray the stories that bind you, where strength is measured not by what you can lift, but by what you can let fall. The samurai never sought to eliminate weakness. They sought to break its dominion, to shatter the lie that it was permanent, unchangeable, definitional, and in that shattering, they found something most people never touch. The quiet power of being completely, devastatingly honest about who they are. Your weakness is waiting for you to stop running from it, not to defeat it, not to overcome it, just to turn and face it with eyes that no longer need it to be anything other than what it is. And in that facing, in that simple act of looking without flinching, the breaking begins. The dojo is silent now. The rain has stopped, and somewhere, in the space between breaths, the old self falls away like ash. What remains is you, not the story of you, not the defended version, not the explained or justified or excused version. Just you. Raw, real, and finally free to move.